Well, so this is just a semi brief, sort of ramble-ish video. Ramble-ish? Don't even think there's a word, but regardless. Obviously, in the past, I've spoken about drug issues in Scotland, mental health and whatnot. For example, just briefly, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke about alcoholism. Several months ago, I spoke about it. A segment from a stream from last year, I spoke about it. It's like I'm no secret to speaking about like drug issues and alcoholism and whatnot. This video here, uh, 7 months ago, latest suicide statistics, my story, thoughts, and advice. And I kind of went in a bit of detail about like my past in relation to substance abuse and whatnot. I also recall a few years ago, 2022, I did it. I think it was like nearly a 3 hour stream I did with John Davidson, which he obviously privatized after what happened about a month later or whatever. But we ended up speaking quite a lot about both of our personal lives and our past and whatnot. So I just want to kind of like briefly go through this. I mean, this is Nevada Media. I'm not going through their take on things per se, just really the sort of statistics that are provided in the article. Why are there so many drug deaths in Scotland? And this is from the 4th of March. And they make reference at the beginning of the article to the safe drug consumption facility that was opened up in Glasgow. And then they say that whilst the Scottish Government supports the full decriminalisation of drugs for personal supply, this facility isn't that. Drug classification is reserved to Westminster, and both Labour and Tory ministers have consistently preferred to pander to tabloid tough on drugs authoritarianism and get a grip of this public health crisis. But it's a good first step. Then, of course, statistically speaking, they say here that 1 in every 4,684 people in Scotland died of a drug overdose in 2023. And it's not just the highest rate in Europe, but it's 3 times higher than the next highest country, which is Ireland. These figures have gotten worse over the past 2 decades, with 2023's rate being 4.2 times higher than that in 2000. And of course, the police, not that long ago, came out and said that the drug deaths have declined in Scotland. But obviously, that's not based on anything other than like police reports and whatnot. So who knows one way or the other? It sort of fluctuates to a certain extent over time, as does every other sort of statistic, whether that be alcoholism or mental health, suicides, etc. The actual number which produces the first stat is 1,172 people who died who didn't have to. And then, sorry, I think there's a couple more stats here. Drug deaths correlate closely with deprivation. People in the most deprived areas of Scotland are more than 15 times as likely to die from drug misuse as people in the least deprived areas. And Scotland has more deprived areas than many other European countries. Similarly, there are 2 common explanations for the recent surge in deaths. First is the so-called train spotting generation, men who came of age during the Thatcher-induced deindustrialisation of the 1980s and 1990s and became addicts then, and they're now hitting middle age when their bodies are giving out, leading to increased death rates. Since 2000, the average age of drug misuse deaths has increased from 32 to 45. And the second explanation for the recent growth in drug deaths is austerity. Austerity policies have had a brutal impact on Scotland, blah, 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 right? And I mean, I think there's a few other reasons as well. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm almost certain that the way that drug deaths in Scotland are sort of documented, that also includes like pharmaceutical pills, but that on top of the fact that there's a lot of like drugs that they're fake, for lack of a better term. So you might be buying a pill of some sort, but it's got something in it that it shouldn't have. For stuff like that. I don't know, benzos play a large role. A lot of these sort of allegedly legal / illegal drugs a lot of concoctions. I mean, on a side note though, just which is obviously the purpose of this wee video here, I think to like sort of, it's the same principle as the video that I made the other week about the Scottish government, and they're talking about ways to reduce drug deaths in Scotland, and their sort of big brain idea is to reduce the stigma. If we just reduce the stigma, then potentially that will lead to a lot more people coming forward and seeking help. I mean, fuck off. But coming away with things like austerity, or like being part of a generation that had to live with the ramifications of deindustrialization, yeah, for some people that might be potentially the root cause of whomever in question. But I think, sadly, when you go down that sort of train of thought, you are in many respects sort of scapegoating issues. Everybody's life is different. Every case is different, hence the term case by case basis, And I think, unfortunately, for whatever reason, and I don't necessarily think any of the sort of explanations that I've seen provided by some experts or Nevada media or the Scottish government, I'm not entirely sure that I'm convinced by any of the explanations, partly because it's obviously a very multifaceted issue, partly because, as I said, case by case basis, but just more to the point, I don't really think any of the explanations are even remotely satisfactory. And I mean, I can really only speak from my, dare I say, lived experience. And I mean, I was never somebody who was into like seriously hard drugs when I was a teenager. But I did go through a period when I was about 16 years of age, all the way up until about 21, where I was taking methadone. Or Meow Meow, Magcat, etc. And it got to such a point by the time I was about 18, 19 years of age, where I was spending all of my wages, and I wasn't getting very much back then because I was just an apprentice. I was spending all of my wages, I would pay my digs, and then all the rest of my money just went immediately into my dealer's back pocket, And I lost a lot of friends during that period of time. And I watched the sort of trajectory that some of them ended up taking lifestyle wise, ended up a lot worse than I ever did at the time. Personalities changed. Reliance on drugs took precedent over friendships and whatnot. Robberies, thievery, lack of trust, relationship breakdowns, etc. Like I watched all that sort of stuff unfold. And one of the sort of things that woke me up back then was there was an individual that I used to occasionally go around to, like his house, that is. And I mean, the guy was in so much debt, and I knew a lot of people that were in a lot of debt back then. I, fortunately, was never one of those people, but I associated with a lot of people that were in debt. And I remember this guy having a staffy, and he had about 3 or 4 separate locks on his door. So if you like knocked on the door, you would have to stand there for about 30 to 40 seconds while he unchained everything, etc. Just simply because he was that paranoid. But it wasn't that in and of itself that gave me the sort of wake up call. It was the fucking state of his house and his poor dog. Like, he was in that much debt that he couldn't leave his own property. Henceforth, his dog never got walked. His dog's in a pretty bad condition as well, on a side note. And like every time I would go in there with people, like his dog would just always gravitate towards me because I'm a dog lover. And the dog was just deprived of any attention. He even used to make occasional jokes from time to time. Oh, you should just take my dog. I wasn't in a financial position to be able to do that, obviously, but hindsight, maybe I should have. And I probably could have if I wanted to. But the point being there, though, that like I used to sit in this guy's house and think to myself, what am I doing? Like, what the fuck am I doing? I was sitting amongst a bunch of people, and I just thought, I'm better than this. Like, and that's not to take anything away, as I said at the beginning of this video. Like, obviously, some of the people that I was associating with, they all had the reasons for doing what they were doing. But for others, it was just silly adolescent behavior. Because, as I say, a lot of us were teenagers. Not all, but some of us were teenagers. you know, and getting out of our nut took precedence over anything else. And I think that, by and large, for a lot of people today, is a sort of accurate description, because there's a lot of people out there who, when they're young anyway, they think that, the world's their oyster, as they say, and they don't necessarily have any responsibilities, and they don't have any qualms and or regrets, and they just think that every day is going to be the same as the day prior. Uh, you know, Second thing, obviously, that woke me up was that, as I say, this guy's house. I was like, what the fuck? Second thing, though, was like, I made a promise to my grandfather that I would stop taking drugs, and I did. So from the age of 21 all the way up until I was about 25, I stopped. I even stopped drinking. Fucking hell. And the only reason I started to drink again was due to boredom in the lockdown period and complications with my penultimate ex. And then eventually I did sort of slip back into old habits, for lack of a better term, when I was about 25. And all throughout 2022, I mean, as I've said before, I was out my tits. Completely out my tits. I don't know how much money I wasted. I don't know how many thousands of pounds I have wasted over the years on drugs. And I mean, it wasn't exactly hard substances, don't get me wrong. But in that respect, that was simply out of, well, it was depression related, you know? And even in 2023, when I was with my ex, there was a few times where I was kind of cunted, for lack of a better term, which led to a lot of arguments between the pair of us. I would see her 3 times out of the 4 weeks every month, and then the fourth month, or the fourth week of every month, I would have a weekend to myself to sort of catch up on Scottish politics and whatnot. But I'd got into like this weird position where I felt that I had to be out my tits to be able to go through all the committees and all the parliament shit. And I mean, that was just a sort of after or ripple effect, I should say, from my past life, because during 2022 and like the last 2 months of 2021, I couldn't, for the life of me, sit and go through PDFs or Scottish parliamentary debates or anything at all without being on drugs. I had to be completely out my face in order to put myself through that. People used to say to me back then, I don't know how you do it. I couldn't do it. Oh my God, I don't know how you do it. I'll tell you how I used to do it. Start my nut, you know? Obviously, as I say, like, these are the sort of things I would do to justify it to myself, you know? And I mean, I look back on those times, and I mean, it changed my personality for a time. I'm not proud of my actions, and I most certainly wish I could turn back the clock and sort of do things differently. And I think there's a lot of people out there that probably would say the same thing about themselves. And that includes people that are on a lot harder substances than I ever partook or like was in the proximity of or vicinity of, even. You know, I think the unfortunate thing, I mean, when I look back, there was a few blips at the end of last year where, like, I was out my face on not just drink. Drink's obviously been a problem for me over the years, but like there was a few instances towards the end of 2024 where I was out my nut. There's one video in particular that, oh fuck, Jesus Christ, that I ended up posting to Telegram, and I was absolutely brainless. Like, but proud of myself that I've stayed away from drugs, and I'm doing quite a lot behind the scenes to stay away from the booze as well. Most certainly ain't a fucking role model by any stretch of the imagination. And if I was a part of any political party or movement, I'm pretty sure I would have been booted out well before now because of some of my antics over the course of the past few years, substance wise. But I do think that there's a lot to be said about mental health in particular, because I do think, and as I say, this isn't to sort of scapegoat and or give people excuses for their actions and whatnot. You have to take accountability and responsibility, which is something that better late than never, but I'm still doing now. You know, I'm trying to get back to the life of being teetotal like I was back in the day. But mental health is something that sort of kind of goes under the radar. And I think that does play a crucial role in a lot of people's decision making as far as substances and whatnot are concerned. And I mean, it's a pretty daft route to take, obviously. Oh, I feel shit. Let me drink. And then you drink and then feel even more shit. And the same principle applies with drugs. But if you're not careful, it can get a grip of you and you start to lose sight of reality and you will make excuses. You will justify it. You will rationalize it to yourself and to those around you. No matter how many times people say to you, you've got a problem, no matter how many times people try to point out the obvious, you will always have an excuse. And that's not to try and convince them. I think indirectly you're trying to convince yourself. And when I say that, I'm speaking from experience. I most certainly was doing that for the longest time, making excuses. Always had an explanation to hand. And I knew damn well that some of the people I was providing these explanations to didn't believe a fucking word of what I was saying, but it was enough for me to be able to justify it to myself. Point in case, as far as alcohol was concerned, last year, I used to say to my ex when she would catch me occasionally drinking first thing in the morning on a Saturday morning, it's like 7 or 8 in the morning, and I'm in the kitchen drinking a beer. Like my excuse would be, it's hair of the dog, you know. I knew damn well she wasn't satisfied with my answer, but it was enough for me, like in terms of like, it was like I was justifying it to myself. As far as drug consumption rooms are concerned, I'm still on the fence about the concept because I don't necessarily think that that is the answer for people that are on seriously hard drugs. You know, there's a lot of questions to be answered and a lack of questions being asked. You know, I think that if anything, it's just enabling people's habits. But if it saves anybody's life, if it provides people with the ability to be able to seek help confidently in the sort of confines of privacy, then I mean, who am I to say otherwise? But as far as claiming that this is going to solve the issues across Scotland, I don't necessarily think it is the answer. Legalising drugs most certainly isn't the fucking answer either. And again, without coming across as contradictory, I don't necessarily think that, you know, trying to get to the root cause of societal deprivation will solve the problem either. And the only reason I say that is because that, again, goes back to the idea of scapegoating. However, I think that on a side note, just a separate issue in general, should be trying to get to the bottom of societal deprivation. Instead of berating people for white privilege, etc., 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 surely we should be doing things to make people's lives better. Thought that's what government officials were supposed to be there in the first place to do. What do I know? But all I will say before I conclude is that if you are somebody, and I mean, if you are that somebody, you ain't necessarily in a position yet to sort of realise what's going on around you, like I was for the longest time. But if you've got a lot of people around you that are saying you might have an issue, etc., maybe take heed. You know? Before it's too late, man. Anyway, adios.